Right now on Law&Crime Report, the officer involved in the shooting of Pamela Turner turns himself into police. The attorneys for the family speak out.
But here, instead, we have an officer who provoked unnecessarily someone who he knew to be suffering from mental illness.
Plus, a dentist in Alaska is sentenced to 12 years in prison. Seth Hart texted a video of himself performing a dental procedure while riding a hoverboard, and now he is facing the consequences. And later, film and TV actress Amy Lokane is going back to prison for a fatal 2010 car crash after a judge determined that her sentence was too lenient. This is the Law&Crime Report, diving into true crime and all legal stories making headlines. It's September 18, 2020.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Terry Austin, and you're watching the Law&Crime Report. The Texas police officer involved in the shooting of Pamela Turner has turned himself into authorities. Police officer Juan de la Cruz shot 45-year-old Pamela Turner back in May 2019 after trying to arrest her for outstanding warrants. Police claim that Turner reached for de la Cruz's taser and used it on him. Let's take a look at what the lawyer for Turner's family had to say at an earlier press conference.
What we have is Officer de la Cruz firing not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 bullets. Think about that. 5 separate bullets at a female who he knows to be mentally ill, who he knows the whole time is simply trying to get away from him. That's another thing. No action of Miss Turner's was to go after the officer. It was always in an effort to get away from him. So he fires these 5 bullets at this female laying on the ground in front of him, looking up, trying to get help, trying to get away from the person who is causing her harm, and he fires bullets into her. There is absolutely no reason why Officer de la Cruz should still have a badge. He should have been placed in handcuffs that night. And as a former police officer, this is one of the most troubling shootings for the simple fact that he was not taken into custody, and 16 months later, he still holds a badge. And it was the police chief and it was the city that said, Officer de la Cruz, what you did, we believe in you. What you did was good. What you did is what we wanted you to do. And that's a problem. That's a serious problem. And we will not stop until Officer de la Cruz is held accountable, both criminally, but also civilly.
To break down this case for us today, we have Gabriela Gonzalez, who is a criminal defense attorney, and we also have Joseph Scott Morgan, who is our forensic expert. Joseph, I'm going to start with you. Not one, not two, not 3, 5 bullets. Was that excessive? Was that necessary?
Well, in this particular case, he's in what we refer to as an asymmetrical position. He's over her at that point in time and fires into her body. She is diminished at that point in time. You have to pause and ask the question, is this a necessary use of force, particularly given the fact that that he has some less than lethal options. We think about taser. They've already talked about how she had reached for his taser. So we're admittedly discussing an individual that has one on his side. Why was that utilized? Why wasn't that utilized? He's also aware of her history. So if you're going to engage with an individual like this, it seems as though that maybe you should have put more thought into initial contact with this individual.
I agree with that 1,000,000%. Gigi, we know that Pamela Turner suffered from schizophrenia. At least that's what the reports have said. We've also seen in these reports that the officer knew she had schizophrenia. Do you think he owed some other duty under either the American Disabilities Act or some other law to treat her differently instead of treating her like a criminal and shooting her 5 times, killing her?
I do. I think that when you understand that you have a defendant with certain disabilities or that require certain accommodations, you owe a duty to, apply those accommodations when you can. It's one thing if this defendant, schizophrenic or what have you, is throwing themselves on top of you with a knife trying to kill you. I mean, okay, at that point, then accommodations are out the window because it's my life versus yours. However, in this situation where you have the defendant trying to get away from you, you know that this person is mentally ill, is mentally unstable. Instead of just getting tased and throwing a charge on her later, right, and arresting her later, you know where she is, you're familiar with her history and her background. Why did it take 5 gunshots in order to handle the situation? It's completely unreasonable, especially considering that this officer was familiar with this defendant and her medical history.
Yes, he was. It seems, at least from the reports, he was familiar with it. Joseph, you mentioned the taser earlier. And if, in fact, the taser was available, the question that I really have is it a deadly force or is it a not deadly force? Because I've heard arguments both ways that obviously, if deadly force is used against a police officer, he or she can respond with deadly force. But let's assume for the sake of argument that Turner did get this taser and did turn it on the police officer and did tase him. Could the police officer then use deadly force against her?
Yeah, because his perception at that moment in time is the fact that he's going to be subject to great harm. If the purpose of a taser is to disable someone in that moment in time. It's an electric shock, so they're essentially frozen for at least a few seconds, so that you can gain control over the individual. And if an individual is reaching for a police officer's taser, they try to take it. Automatically, I think intellectually and maybe from a survivable standpoint, the police officer, their perception is great harm is about to be perpetrated on them because the individual is not obeying a lawful order. And so you don't know, you can't predict the future. So I think that's, once a taser is taken away from a police officer and they have a perception that it's going to be used on them, yeah, they can escalate to deadly force at that particular time. But again, some of this still remains quite unclear as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree. Until we get all the facts, we really can't jump to a conclusion. Benjamin Crump, who we've seen in the past, he's one of the attorneys representing the family in this case. Let's take a look at what he had to say about the charges.
What they charged Officer De La Cruz with. They charged him with aggravated assault, which is graded as a felony 2. But if the aggravated assault is committed by a public servant in the performance of their duties, it is graded as a felony 1. And as Attorney Jacobs and I discussed, and we found it quite fascinating, that is the same as a murder charge. Manslaughter is only charged as a felony 2, but it's aggravated assault when committed by a public servant in performance of their duties is graded as a felony 1, where he can be sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. And so we thought that was important to articulate that we believe Kim Ogg's office and the district attorney's office in Harris County, Texas, got it right.
The news that my family received on Monday is the exact reason why we have not stopped calling my mother's name for the past 16 months. I prayed for this very moment numerous times, and I prayed that my mother's death would not be in vain, and that she gets the justice that she deserves. It's good to know that the jurors in that room were able to see that Juan De La Cruz deserved to be punished for the crime that he committed. He took my mother's life.
That last speaker you saw was Turner's daughter, Chelsea Rubin. Gigi, Do you think that in this case, we will get the justice that the attorneys are seeking, that this case will be pursued, that there will be indictments on the criminal side, and perhaps even a case on the civil side?
Yes, definitely. Well, the fact that Ben Crumpet is incredibly optimistic about this is a positive. And the fact that the grand jury came back with this charge of felony one aggravated assault by a public servant is indicative of, what's coming down the pipe, right? I do expect an indictment to come down. I expect this to go to trial as well. And I sure hope that Chelsea and the entire Turner family gets justice. And you could see that this family has been relentless in their pursuit of justice. They've waited 16 months for this moment. And I'm sure that they're going to continue forward optimistically, hoping that justice is served.
Let me follow up with that. How do you think Ben Crump gets in contact with these types of individuals who have gone through this traumatic event, like the George Floyds, the Ahmaud Arbery's? Someone asked me that the other day. I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Ben has created a reputation of himself of being a very zealous advocate on behalf of victims who have suffered at the hands of police brutality. I first learned about him this year through Ahmaud Arbery, his representation of Ahmaud, and then from there, it just catches on. And unfortunately, this is such a common scenario that there's a whole lot of people that could use his services. And because he's become so high profile and he is such an amazing advocate for these families, it's excellent word of mouth advertising.
Exactly. Joseph, let me turn to you now. We know that Dela Cruz is an 11-year veteran on the police force. And yet, here he took this situation of a woman, presumably he knew she had schizophrenia. She might have been grabbing for his taser, and yet he shot her 5 times. What does that tell us about policies and procedures at these police departments?
Yeah, I think that it's significant because there is a standard operating procedure. And also, look, anybody that's in law enforcement understands what's referred to as the force continuum. And that is this escalation of force. And you're taught this in the academy. I still teach at the academy, over the years. And this is just rooted and grounded in it. And I think that the problem here, Terry, is also the fact that this guy's not fresh out of the academy. He's been on the streets arguably for, as you had mentioned, 11 years. So there's an expectation that with years comes experience, and so I think that can be drawn into question. And look, if I may say, one of the things that he's really going to have to contend with in here and his team, I think, is going to be the forensic evidence, because if they demonstrate in court that he was standing over her and he fired these shots into her body, that is damning evidence. And it's going to be interesting to see how his defense team handles this moving forward and how they describe these injuries, because you're going to have a forensic pathologist that's going to get on that stand, and they're going to talk about the angle of fire. They're going to talk about range of fire, and it's going to be striking.
Right. Gigi, Joseph raises a very good question. Do you think that if, in fact, the evidence shows that it was over the body, it was 5 times, that it was intentional, we might get a higher charge here, like a murder charge?
Well, from what Ben Crump explained, where Dela Cruz is being charged, this aggravated assault is a felony 1, which is treated as high as a murder charge. Right. So I don't know if the charges will be upped, but I believe that the current charges now that the grand jury delivered back is most likely the most appropriate to apply here.
Exactly. All right, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll be looking at the reckless dentist case. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. We are now turning to the case of Seth Hart. He is an Anchorage dentist, and he was caught on video extracting a patient's tooth as he rode a hoverboard. That's right, a hoverboard. He was sentenced to 12 years for unlawful dental acts, which I've never heard of, and reckless endangerment and Medicaid fraud and other crimes. The 2016 hoverboard stunt preceded a wider probe of his practices. I'm going to turn to Gigi now. Listen, had he not been on this hoverboard trying to extract a tooth from one of his patients, I guess one could argue that no one would have looked into his practice. As it turns out, there were over 40 causes of actions, 40 counts in the complaint. What do you think about that?
You know, one of his victims personified him perfectly, where he's this narcissistic, reckless person who, you know, decided to create a new standard of care and thought that he was so above everything that he could get away with it. And the truth of the matter is, he was extracting teeth without consent and without knowledge. He was performing anesthesia on clients without training or consent. He stole $2 million from the government. He embezzled from his bosses, and who knows what else. And you're absolutely right. His narcissism, you got him into this situation, because if he never posted this, if he never took a video of himself and posted it on the internet or wherever he posted it, bragging about his new standard of care, then no one would have looked into him, or it would have taken longer for people to see what kind of reckless dentist that this man is.
Yeah, I mean, those are all excellent points. I was going to ask you, tell us how you really feel about this, but I'm going to ask you as a follow-up. In a case like this, do you think he should ever be allowed to practice again?
No, I do not think he should be. First of all, people are already scared of the dentist. They're already hesitant to go. And now, you know, this is an awful, awful PR for dentistry, let me tell you. Because if you think for a second that your dentist might be extracting the wrong tooth, you know, on a hoverboard while you're under anesthesia that you didn't even consent to, and this man has no idea how to even apply it, you know, it's going to make people think twice about going in twice a year for their regular checkups.
I couldn't agree with you more. Going to the dentist is a very scary thing. And thinking that he's on a hoverboard, he's going to take out the wrong tooth, it really would deter people from going. Joseph, let me ask you, from an evidentiary standpoint, this case seems pretty straightforward. I mean, we have a video of him, and he posts the video himself. What else do we need to get this guy, you know, really making sure that he never practices dentistry again?
You know, it's reminiscent of I used to be a fan of David Letterman, the late night show with him, and one of the things that Letterman used to do was a thing called stupid human tricks, and he would have people come on air and do these crazy things, and of course the entire nation saw it. In this particular case, we've got documentary evidence of him doing this, and this extends even out further. We begin to talk about Medicaid fraud. He's left this trail of, you know, numbers and these little electronic dots and dashes as far as breadcrumbs go to. And I wonder if this goes to kind of this psychopathy that he's, you know, a few years ago, I don't know if you guys recall, but there was actually a surgeon that was taking selfies in the surgical suite with patients on the table under anesthesia. Listen, when it comes to medical care, I got to tell you, I don't want there to be any distractions whatsoever. All right. Gigi had mentioned that we're already scared of the dentist. Now I'm absolutely positively terrified of the dentist. I don't want a dentist on a hoverboard. I want somebody that is very, very laser focused into what they're doing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with both of you. So let's just hope that our dentists don't ever do anything like that. Let's switch gears now to an Ohio teen who pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter after pushing a log off a cliff. And he was with a friend, and he actually killed a photographer who was walking below. The teen apologized in court for the horrible incident. Let's take a look at his plea of guilt.
That my actions would result in this. I have thought about the fact that I caused someone's death every day since it happened, and I will carry that with me for the rest of my life. I appreciate the kindness of Ms. Schaefer's family, the Attorney General's office, and the prosecutor's office in giving me a second chance. I realize that nothing I say can bring Miss Schaefer back. But I am truly sorry. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
That was a tiny bit difficult to hear, but he was pleading guilty there to involuntary manslaughter. The original charges were murder and reckless homicide. Those were dropped. Gigi, do you think that he got off easy to avoid here the murder charge?
He definitely accepted a plea of guilty in order to reduce the charges. So yes, he did make out favorably. Do I think he got off lightly? No. You know, at the end of the day, this wasn't some depraved murderer who was stalking his prey and taking him out. This is some teenage boy acting recklessly. And, you know, if it happened anywhere else at any other time, maybe that log would have landed on anyone. And it's just this awful, awful situation where, oh my gosh.
It was an awful situation, you're saying?
Sorry, thank you. I disconnected for a moment. It's this awful situation where you have two kids that are just not thinking of the next step after their decision. So, you know, he feels extremely remorseful. The statement that he made, you know, he appreciates the kindness of the state attorney and the kindness of the Schaefer family, you know, which tells us that he's sincere in his remorse and he's ready to take responsibility. And he's going to be serving 3 to 4.5 years in prison. So he is not getting off lightly.
One of the things I wondered about, Gigi, I'm just going to follow up with that, is what was his motive there? He was with a friend. To your point, they were playing around. But do you think he saw the photographer and the fact that she was taking pictures of students? Do you think he saw them below? Or do you think, and we won't hear this because he has taken this guilty plea, but what do you think? His motive was just, I'm playing around here, let's push this log?
Yeah, if they even thought that far ahead, you know, like I have to wonder if they even looked over the cliff to see if there's anyone beneath them. I think that, you know, these two teenage boys saw this log on the ground and decided to have a feats of strength competition and just threw it off to be.
Right. We might be losing Gigi there. I'm going to turn to Joseph right now. Joseph, we know that this log was 75 pounds. Do you think it could have been possible that a log that size might have actually killed one of the students? We know that she was taking pictures, and this sounds like a huge log. Could have maybe have even hurt someone or killed someone else at that point.
Travel to the height from which it's falling. And I got to tell you something, his statement left me feeling hollow for the Schaefer family. It was trite. It was canned. He read it. You know, I didn't see, I didn't see a lot of demonstration of remorse there, you know, and this is not something that is a recent manifestation in teen community. Just over the past few years, and we've actually covered them here on the Law and Crime channel. The kids going to overpasses and throwing off cinder blocks and stones. There's one kid out of Michigan in particular. There was a whole group of boys that killed a guy going down the road, a father. And, you know, there really needs to be a strong message sent about this kind of careless behavior. It's not like they're 5 years old, okay? They're 17 at this point.
Right.
That's a problem. That's a real problem.
Yeah, I have a problem with it as well. I think, you know, he pled guilty, so we might not know more about the motive. And I did find his statement to be a little flat. One thing I wanted to ask you, Joseph, is at first the authorities thought that this was an accident, that the log just fell off on its own accord. And then something led them to believe, no, people pushed the log off. What do you think at the scene caused them to change their viewpoint about how this accident occurred?
Well, there would be evidence. You know, if you're out in the woods and you're dealing with something that is this heavy, it's going to leave an impression in the ground from where it was seated. Okay, so there'll be there could be, I don't know, evidence of somebody utilizing another piece of wood to kind of leverage this thing to roll it down. There could be footprints up there where people are pushing their shoulder to it, if you will, you know, trying to get leverage on the thing to push it over the edge. So there's any number of indicators out there. Listen, I've done a lot of hiking over my life. I've lived in the mountains. I've been around when stones just spontaneously fall, but most of the time they were like bits of cliff that were attached to something. It's really odd just to see an old log that kind of suddenly gives way while somebody just happens to be standing beneath it to come crashing down a hillside. So it would give them pause to look at this.
Yeah, I agree. Now I don't want to go to the dentist, nor do I want to go hiking. Let's take a break right now. And when we come back, we will be talking about the Amy Lokane case. She's the actress from Melrose Place. Welcome back, everyone. The film and TV actress Amy Lokane is going back to prison after a judge decided her sentence was too lenient. You may recall that Lokane starred in the show Melrose Place. The original judge sentenced her to 3 years. A second judge, after appeals, changed that sentence to 8 years. She will now have to serve at least 6 of those 8 years. We have Gigi back with us. Gigi, this is a strange case, if you ask me. The fact that this could be double jeopardy, it's an argument I think that her attorneys could make, that she is being subjected twice to this sentencing. And who's to say that the 3 years wasn't enough? What are your views on that?
Yeah, this is a very rare and unusual situation for sure. Personally, I've never seen this. And I imagine that not a lot of attorneys have really seen this because usually what happens at sentencing, you get your sentence, you fulfill your obligation, whatever the sentence is, and you go on to live your life. So it's very rare for defendants to serve time in prison, go off to their go off to society and re-enter only to return back. It's very interesting and unusual for sure.
Right. Joseph, she was sentenced because this was vehicle homicide, basically, where she was driving 53 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone. The individual was driving 3 miles an hour, turning into his driveway. I mean, what kind of impact could that hit have made here? It killed the wife here, and,
Yep.
he was injured. I'm imagining that going 53 miles an hour, hitting someone going 3 miles per hour would really have been significant damage there.
In car crashes, the leading cause of death, what is specifically what we find, at autopsy in car crashes is literally listed as blunt force trauma. And she would have sustained, the wife would have sustained a tremendous amount of non-survivable trauma. Remember, they're virtually sitting still, Terry, when they're impacted by this woman who reeks of alcohol, when the cops show up. And she literally, we've heard the term T-boned. Well, this is a T-bone. That is, Lokane's car is traveling at a high rate of speed. And, the question is here, they're essentially in their driveway when they're struck. It's not like she hits them head on while they're coming down the street. You know what I'm saying? So that just goes to how odd and bizarre the event, the actual accident was. So yeah, I bet the husband was suffering as well. Not to mention the fact that he's lost his bride, but the fact that he's physically suffering as well. It's a tremendous shock. He's very fortunate to be alive himself, and of course, Lokane. I don't know how severely she was injured, but it seems like the people that perpetrate these things, many times rarely come out physically unscarred.
I agree with that. Fred and Helena Seaman, the individuals who were hit by Lokane, we know for a fact that they must have been, hit really hard. It must have just been such a difficult accident to go through, and knowing that your wife did not survive that. Joseph, I'm going to follow up with you. The blood alcohol level was 0.23%, and they said it was nearly 3 times the limit for legal impairment. What does that do to your body? What was she doing or not doing that she should have been doing had she not had this alcohol in her system?
Okay, I'm moving away from the law here. We're going to talk about the science of this. Okay, so there is the legal limit for being inebriated, while operating a motor vehicle. But let's say, for instance, you've got a history of chronic ethanol or chronic alcohol abuse. Well, you have a certain level of tolerance. So her level, as high as that was, might be kind of a standard for her, as opposed to someone that just doesn't drink a lot. And if you have that much on board, I've seen people actually almost succumb to alcohol poisoning at that level. So it's going to be variable. But we can say this: she was incapable, at least from a motor sense, um, to stop the vehicle. And when I say motor sense, I'm not talking about the vehicle itself. I'm talking about her ability to judge. But she was upright and functioning enough to turn on the ignition, put it in gear, put her foot on the accelerator, and drive down a city street. But she couldn't make the judgment that she was in a neighborhood with a very low speed limit, and she hammers these poor people as they're just going about their life.
Right. It's really hard to even envision something like that. You're driving home, you're at your driveway, pulling in,
Yeah.
and bam, your whole life changes. Gigi, it begs the question from a legal perspective, should her driver's license be revoked completely?
I don't know. And I would just like to retort on Dr. Joseph Morgan, where, the blood alcohol, and obviously she is able to tolerate this much alcohol because that level of blood alcohol content would put anyone under the table. So obviously this is very comfortable for her. And also the courts did not feel that drunk driving what played a factor in this. At the end of the day, this woman, though she was speeding, was going 53 miles and a 35 miles per hour. She's definitely speeding, but if there was no accident and an officer just saw her driving by and she wasn't reeking of alcohol, that'd be a speeding ticket and everyone goes home. And at the end of the day, I don't want to victim blame, but the Siemens turning in and making a turn in front of her car, that's what caused the crash. It's not because she was drunk driving. So, at the end of the day, should her license be revoked forever? I don't know. I don't know if that would be fair.
Well, here's the question that I have as a follow-up to that. Clearly, it isn't that many miles per hour in excess, but the fact that she did not slow down, and I guess the fact that, she actually was the one to hit the car, does that change your opinion at all regarding, whether or not she had been drinking, would the accident have occurred?
That depends. I would like to know, how close, where was Siemens' car? Like, when did they turn relative to her distance? If it happened where she was, enough distance away for her to be able to brake and pause and wait for the turn to happen, then, and if she didn't do that, then obviously she should be held responsible for that. But was this a quick turn where the defendant could not react on time? That would be completely different.
Right. I'm sure people are going to argue that because the Siemens were taking a left turn versus, going straight or taking a right turn, and who had the right of way. Joseph, this is the question I have for you, though. There's this doctrine of who had the last chance to certainly avoid this accident. In your view, do you think that obviously Lokane hit the car, so she would be the one who is liable for this and criminally responsible for this, versus even if taking a left turn, you are really supposed to be the one to yield under our traffic laws?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the victims in this case do have a responsibility. The operator of the vehicle has a responsibility. Did they have full awareness of this car that was approaching them at a high rate of speed? And did they look, before they turned left, because they're turning across traffic at this point in time? Let's keep in mind his wife's side of the vehicle was the initial point of impact, and so how much care did he take in making this turn? That's what kind of baffles me about this case all the way through, because you've got an individual that has already been charged, and they're going to bring this back up. I think that when you think about this from a very broad perspective, you have to wonder if this thing is going to stand up under appeal.
Right, exactly. Gigi, we know that Fred, the driver, the husband, is going to be in court and he's going to talk during the sentencing. And, what impact might that have?
I wish that I knew, I wish I knew the answer to that. The truth of the matter is, Mr. Seaman's wife passed away in this accident, and at the end of the day, he wants to make sure that justice is served. Not that that will bring back his wife, but I think it would be important for Mr. Seaman to be present in court to see, what decision will be made as far as, if the defendant in this case is going to be, resentenced and thrown back into prison or not, or what kind of effect that will have. I think that his presence will definitely tell the judge that Mr. Seaman is serious about justice. But I would like to know if the fact that she served 3 years in prison, already would make a difference to Mr. Seaman. The fact that she has committed to sobriety and counsels others and, helps praise the benefits of sobriety, I think that shows remorse and rehabilitation. And I wonder if that will be taken into consideration.
Right. Yeah, it's true. If in fact she is helping others to rehabilitate, and in fact, if it's a wake-up call for her, then, the question is, was justice really served here? Let's take a break. And when we come back, we will be updating the Holly Bobo murder. Welcome back, everyone. Jason Autry's been released from prison following his guilty plea. Autry is the third and final suspect in the Holly Bobo murder case. He pled guilty to solicitation to commit murder and facilitation to aggravated kidnapping. Autry was a cooperating witness and was sentenced to 8 years for time served. His accomplice, Zach Adams, was sentenced to life, and Zach's brother, Dylan, pled guilty to 35 years. The victim, Holly Bobo, was a 20-year-old nursing student who was kidnapped and killed in 2001. Her remains were discovered 3 years later. Let's take a look at the previous court appearance of Jason Autry.
You are Jason Wayne Autry?
Yes, sir.
In case 17 CR 10, it's indicated you may wish to enter a plea of guilty. Are you doing this freely and voluntarily?
Yes, sir.
Nobody forcing you to enter a plea against your wishes?
No, sir.
Do you fully understand what you're doing today?
Yes, sir.
Have you consulted fully and thoroughly, discussed the case fully and thoroughly with your respective attorneys?
Yes, sir.
Talked with them about the nature of the offenses as well as any possible legal defenses?
Yes, sir.
Pleading guilty to count 3, especially aggravated kidnapping. The range 1 offender could get 15 to 25 years, and the charged offense on count 8 is first-degree murder. That could be life without parole, or death. If the court accepts your plea, plead guilty to facilitating especially aggravated kidnapping. That's an amended charge, be an 8-year sentence as a range 1 standard offender, 30% classification. Count 2, you'd be pleading guilty to solicitation of murder 1, receive an 8-year sentence, range 1 standard offender, and 30% classification. They will run concurrent. Do you understand what that means?
Yes, sir.
They're also running concurrent with a federal sentence.
Yes, sir.
That was the judge in the Jason Autry case, making sure he understood the charges against him. Gigi, the judge there went through one point after another, making sure that Autry understood what he was pleading guilty to, making sure he understood the meaning of the word consecutive. Why do judges do that? They take such time and effort to make sure that the defendant who's pleading understands the consequences of those pleas.
Well, it's important because the defendant has to enter into this plea knowingly and voluntarily. And then it's important during the colloquy that the judge go through every single point to make sure that the defendant is knowingly and voluntarily accepting, whatever the responsibility is, and can't later down the road make an appeal saying, hey, I didn't understand that, or that wasn't translated to me, or I was drunk and high and I couldn't understand what was going on around me. We went through this entire colloquy. I went step by step, and you looked me and told the court that I do understand and accept responsibility. So it is always very important for judges to be very thorough to preserve the record and make sure that there's no room for appeals.
That's exactly right. And making sure that the defendant has all of his due process rights given to him. Joseph, you probably remember this case because I remember this case. It took so long to find Holly Bobo's remains. It took 3 years. They found her skull, her teeth, her ribs, her shoulder. You know, what can they determine from those remains? We know that there was a bullet hole. What else can they determine? What happened? That's what I want to know. What happened to Holly Bobo?
Yeah, and I do want to talk about Holly and not so much about Autry. I mean, I'm glad that they got the convictions on these other guys, but Holly was a sweet girl. She was a nursing student, and she was led off into these woods. Just so people understand this, I've covered this case from the beginning. She was led off into these woods like a wild animal, all right? And where she had been kidnapped, she was taken out, probably raped, and then she was executed, put down in the woods. And when you talk about the remains that were found, this is only partial skeletal remains. They still didn't recover everything, Terry. And Holly had sustained a gunshot wound, and folks at home will literally touch right above their right ear to the rear a bit back here. She was shot here, execution style, and the trajectory went from here and exited here out of her jaw. So you've got an individual standing over her with a weapon that shoots her in the back of the head after they've done with her and treated her like garbage and threw her away in these woods and left her. And the reason you don't have any more skeletal remains is because animals came in and scavenged her body. That's what they did to her. All they found was a scapula, a shoulder blade, a few of her long bones, her teeth, and her jaw, which wound up telling the tale at the end of the day. And it's just an absolutely heartbreaking case.
Yes, I mean, the way you describe it, it truly is heartbreaking. And as I said before, I do remember when this case was in the news. A follow-up question for you, Joseph. Is there any way to determine whether or not she was raped? As you said, we think maybe there were multiple defendants here, 2 brothers and a third individual took her out to the woods. Her brother saw her being walked out into the woods with at least one of those individuals. Yep. Is there any way to determine with what very little remains were there, whether or not she was raped?
Yeah. At this point, all you could go on is kind of testimonial or eyewitness information. There's not going to be a lot of physical evidence. You know, at first, I don't know if folks remember this, where Holly died or where she was found, her boyfriend at the time, you know, he came under suspicion. He was actually on the family's property, if I remember correctly. He was turkey hunting, actually, and they had talked over the phone just prior to her, you know, vanishing. You know, her little brother witnessed her being led off into the woods. And, but the guy that he saw leading his sister off into the woods didn't fit the description of the boyfriend. This guy was big, robust. He was wearing camouflage. He had a hat on. So they, you know, that tells me a lot about what their purpose was. Why else would 3 guys go after this young girl and take her off into the woods? You know, they're not going out there for a picnic. They're not going out like the people that discovered her body. I don't know if folks are aware of this. The people that found her body were actually looking for ginseng root. And that's how they came across these skeletal remains out in the woods. I can guarantee you they weren't out there doing that. So, but all we can do is speculate at this point, right? Because anything that remained of her is just in this ultimate disrespect is scattered to the wind, Terry.
Right, exactly. Gigi, let me ask you very quickly, do you think that it took a long time? Why did it take so long to get all 3 defendants?
You know, it takes a while for this type of situation to unfold, especially when you have a cooperating witness. You have a situation where that person is expected to testify or, you know, work to ensure that the other defendants are found guilty. So that's why it took a while.
Exactly. Thank you so much, my wonderful guests, Joseph Scott Morgan, Gigi Gonzalez. Everyone stay tuned to regular program and have a great weekend.